Hello, we are live. Good morning, Texas and Louisiana, joining us on your TV sets with Smart Money Culture TV network, as well as joining around the world. Good morning and good day on LinkedIn, X, YouTube, and the works. We have a great show lined up today. We will have a presidential appointee, Mr. Kyle Hauptman. He'll be joining near the end of the show, talking about some of the important things that we do here in Washington, D.C., that he does, having to do with your money. Your money. As well, we have the great Matt Dixon joining. The world, of course, we'll talk about it all. We'll talk about the stocks. We'll talk about your Bitcoins. We'll talk about the different other ones. We're going to talk about gold. Gold and silver are both looking pretty nicely, I must say. Remember, part of the monetary revolution is diversifying into different assets out of the US dollar, gold, silver, Bitcoin, these different types of crypto, different things that are not so manipulated by the central bank. Central bank, of course, fronts all the money for the different things that the government wants to do and that they want to do, and that has caused inflation to go up a lot. And we're going to dive into that a bit more. Of course, there's a lot of intricacies. I can tell you, I've been involved in the monetary revolution for over a decade now. And, I was saying this whole thing was going to crash 10 years ago. So I always tell people now, I've been saying it was going to crash for a decade. Okay. So they are very good at monetary policy. And it may not be good for you and it may not be good for me, but they certainly they have an unfettered way and ability and access to tax you and me however much they want, just by diluting the supply of money or tightening it. But they like to dilute it. Over $34 trillion in debt. $34 trillion in debt we are right now at the time of this broadcast, which I think it's actually 34 trillion $700 billion. And you will start to see this they're talking more and more taxes. One of the reasons why they're talking more and more taxes is because historically the amount of income tax that they bring every year is the amount of money needed to service the debt, to pay the interest rates on the amount of money that the central bank has fronted. And again, that's just paper money. They're just fronting the paper money, fronting it from you, and then they have this ability to tax people, and people haven't quite figured it out. People are starting to figure it out because of shows like this and people like us coming on and telling you every day. People are starting to figure it out. It's also gotten to a point where things have gotten very expensive, and it's hard for people to pay their bills and still be okay and go on vacation and all these types of things. So we have, of course, gold is up, like I mentioned. Stocks are up, Bitcoin's up. The war drums are beating on. We have, there was a missile or a drone that struck a bus and a car inside Russia over the last 24 hours. I think it killed like 6 people. You have missiles and flying back and forth, and bombs flying back and forth over there in the Middle East. Nobody really wants these wars to end. I mean, I'll tell you, that's one thing that is very, very clear. Besides you and me, and really, I guess, normal people don't really want these wars to end. Or a lot of people don't want, too many people don't want the wars to end. And then, of course, you have the protest as well. And now, I have to caution all my friends too. Oh, Soros is paying for this. Soros. Oh, Soros. Guys, don't fall for the whole boogeyman thing, okay? Soros is not behind all of the protests. all of the NGOs and the different people that we all know about, that you know about deep in your heart, or you know front end, who they are paying for it. It's not just Soros. Soros is involved, quite possibly, of course, but it's like they put this guy up there. Oh, it's Soros. Oh, it's Soros. And then, it's like the whole shiny thing, right? Oh, the shiny object. Oh, okay. Oh, all right. And you don't look at the broader picture. The broader picture is being funded by all of these groups, the NGOs and the U.S. government, okay, and all that. But anyway, everybody likes to hate on Soros, and he's definitely not a friend of mine. But there you go. We have, it's crazy. It is an absolutely crazy situation over there, the Middle East. To be quite frank, I think that everybody should just kind of relax. I'm also, when you look at these new laws and stuff like this that are being put out there, we don't need any new laws. The last thing we need are laws. There's plenty of laws. And then when you look at how much we're getting taxed for everything, it's just absolutely insane. It's insane. Someone ran some numbers by me over the week, or I saw them or something. And if you make $100, okay, if you make $100, and let's talk about the kids, right? Let's talk about the kids, I guess. You make $100, you pay 33% of it in tax, right? So now you have $67, right? Then you go and you fill up your car for $67, which is a very real number, and 48% of that is taxed. So on your $100, you literally had like $30 that you kept yourself, and the rest of it was tax. So we're in a situation right now where we're being taxed, because that's just the front end tax. That's not even the dilution tax that we're all feeling, that the tax of inflation. So right now we're all really, really being taxed a lot. And I don't know what's going to get us to the point where we're going to say, okay, is enough. But certainly that is crazy numbers. These are crazy numbers. And then Biden is floating raising the capital gains tax to like 45%, 44.5%, or something crazy like that. Guys, you're going to see everybody just leave. And, speaking of that, look at Roger Ver. Unbelievable. Roger Ver, this guy renounced his citizenship in 2014. He paid $375,000 in exit tax. Okay, 2014, he renounced his citizenship. And just to make sure I had that right. I was involved in Bitcoin and everything back then. Bitcoin was very cheap at the time. Okay, so he paid his tax and he left. And they just picked him up in Spain for a transaction saying that he owed taxes on from 2017. Now, Veer's, I've known Roger for years. We're friendly. But, he can be a little rough around the edges, for sure. It makes people mad at him. He's good at that. But what in the world is going on here? You know what I mean? They say he owes $50 million in tax on that transaction when he wasn't even a citizen. Look at Kim.com. And actually, he was hanging out with Kim.com recently. I don't know if that had something to do with it. Kim.com. Guy never even came here. He never even came to the United States. Never had any business here. And we took everything from him. The United States, took all his money, took his companies and everything. So anyway, we got big problems here. We got big situations that we're going to have to handle. We're going to have to take care of. I think that don't get caught up in this like color revolution. Like right now, the big move right now is they want everybody divided, right? This one hates this, that one hates this, this one hates this, that one, you know what I mean? They want everybody divided. And you're much easier to control. If you're divided, you're much easier to control. And that's what they do. It's very simple. And it's the same thing, all of the stuff that's being used right now, the stuff that the CIA used in different countries over the last decades. And now it's being used on you. It's being used on you, and it's being used on me. and it's to break apart break us apart so we're easier to control. And I get it. You don't want some people here. You don't want these guys that are protesting in your country. You don't want the Palestinians in your country. I get it. Okay. But you guys got to stop being reactionary. I talked about it a bit last week, because I was telling you all months ago that if we support this war in Gaza, that they're going to bring the Palestinians here. And nobody wanted to hear it. And everybody said, I actually called me names. Many people called me names, kicked me out of groups, told me I was a bad guy. It was very, very clear what was going to happen. It was planned from the very beginning. I don't talk about it that much anymore, but now it's front and center. And I can tell you, if they're already talking about bringing them over, they already have, guys. I mean, that's just the way our government works. If they're talking about flying Palestinians over here, they already are. Guys, they already are. They're here. They're on the dole. They're getting their monthly allowance. They're getting their free housing. I don't know where the whole thing stops. And to be clear, I don't blame the Palestinians, or do I think it's really wrong for them to come here. We, the United States, supported the bombing of their homes. They don't have a home anymore because of the bombs that the United States paid for and many times took out. So why shouldn't we be on the dole for giving them a home? I mean, a little bit of just reality to everybody. Now, I think if you look at international law, it should be Israel that has to give them asylum. But anyway, point is that everybody needs to start thinking a few steps ahead. I used to say think like a woman, because that's how my wife thinks, right? My wife, she's very smart. My wife's very smart. And over the years, it took me a while to realize how the whole scam was working, right? How my wife, for the whole scam, she's controlling me. My wife was controlling me all these years so eloquently. And I was just blind to it. But now in my older age, I get it. Now, I'm being a little bit funny, but it's true, right? Because she was always thinking a few steps ahead. And for the most part, we are reactionary, right? You're in your own head, thinking about your own things. You're doing your own stuff. Someone comes at you with something, you react. Come at you, you react. Now is not the time for us to just react. You guys need to get your heads out of your butts and start thinking. What is going to happen if we do this? What's going to happen if we do that? Very, very clear. And if you listen to people like myself, we told you in no uncertain words that if you do that, if you start a military operation for whatever, okay, over there, Israel, they don't want those people there. Why aren't they going to push them out? But anyway, I don't want to get into all that. Those people are going to come here and they're going to claim asylum, and they're going to be flown in here by the same NGOs and the government organizations that are working against you and keeping your border open. So I know a lot of you guys love Israel, but do you love Israel more than your own kids? Should it be okay for Israel to remove the Palestinians and put them in your hometown? And again, I got nothing against the Palestinians at all, to be honest with you. I think there's a lot of Palestinian Christians that have been persecuted, but they were allowed to live there. And anyway, I don't want to get into it that much more. That's enough. I've already said more than I wanted to. But what I want you guys to do is stop thinking reactionary. Start thinking ahead. What's going to happen? What's going to happen if we do this? If we back Ukraine, what's going to happen? If I don't buy Bitcoin, what's going to happen? If I don't start participating in the monetary revolution, what's going to happen? If I don't put my money in real estate, if I don't put my money in gold, if I don't put my money in crypto, what's going to happen to my money? If you had $100,000 50 years ago, it's hardly worth anything right now. But if you put $100,000 in gold 50 years ago, you did really well. The future of our kids is directly influenced by the decisions that we make today. And we need to start making better decisions. And it's not easy. Trust me, it's not easy. I'm here in Washington. I know how it is. We had a wonderful event at the GBA. We interviewed some great guys. We're going to have them on earlier. Let's bring on Matt Dixon, the great Matt Dixon. Let's talk about the markets. Sir Matt, how are you?
Morning, Bruce. I've always said, and I'll say it again, Bruce for president. What wise words.
Thank you, sir. One day, maybe. One day.
Maybe not, actually. Maybe Bruce's wife for president.
She is smart, man. She I always say, and I don't know if everyone's wives are that way, but they're funny. I think it's a almost like an evolutionary trait. They have to manipulate the strong man. Not manipulate's the wrong word, but they have to make sure the guy does what they want him to do. So they're always thinking ahead. But anyway, she would be a great president, actually.
It's true. Women actually, there's always the thing, isn't there, that men can only think one thing at a time. Women can actually think different things and come to probably a more balanced conclusion, which is kind of what you're saying, and it's actually true.
Yep.
So, yeah, amazing.
Well, good to see you. How is it out there in Dubai? Oops.
Everything's picking up. Dubai bounce is back. That's what's so amazing about Dubai. When you see a road accident in the UK, obviously it's very sad, but the road is closed for 2 days while they do investigations, find out what the issue and everything. In Dubai, there's an accident, again, very sad, but the road's back open within 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Because they clear it away quickly. And
they sweep it. You got the guys out there and they're like sweeping it. You could have like an egg on the road after 30 minutes after the car crash.
Yeah. So I love the way Dubai bounces back from whatever faces it. So I'm just going to go on to share my screen. There's been a lot of developments. We had the big news out on Friday, didn't we? Non-farm payrolls.
Mm-hmm.
So that was big news. So
came in hotter than expected.
The opposite. So I trust you can see my screen, yeah?
Yes.
I'm just showing my Twitter post. This was actually the non-farm payrolls that came out last Friday. And actually, what I'll do, I think I'll go onto my other screen. I'll go onto here. Play from start there. So we'll go onto my old thing because this is what really matters. Inflation appears to be receding a little bit, and that's probably good news. But the big worry is that as inflation is receding, if we get a fall off in employment, in other words, a rise in unemployment, as we've said over and over again, I don't know how many times now, that every time we see unemployment rising, we see recession correlated with it every single time without exception. And what we are seeing is these are the figures that came out last Friday. Now we saw a massive miss on the employment, basically non-farm payrolls. The consensus expectation was 243,000 jobs. It came out 175,000. Not only that, we saw basically the revisions to the previous figures that were issued previous months, and the previous 2 months were actually revised down lower than expected. So that's more negative news. The unemployment rate actually ticked up, and that's the first signs. If we just go back to that last screen, that's the first sign when unemployment begins to tick up, you're on the verge of recession coming in. So that is the real warning sign, flashing red, is that the unemployment rate is beginning to tick higher. And participation rate stayed the same, but hourly earnings actually ticked down a bit. So the economy is beginning to soften a little bit. These are quite worrying signs that we're beginning to see because it's, as I've said, it's what we anticipated, well, what has been anticipated every time is that recession follows these particular things happening. So the question is, will we get a soft landing? And a soft landing is basically where you get inflation back under control, but employment and growth stay steady, and it's perfect. Goldilocks, everything's fine, not too hot, not too cold. That's what we're after. And that's what some economists were saying for some time is likely to happen. I've been saying for some time that I think inflation will come down, and we've got CPI figures coming out on the 15th. So we've got PPI, I think, on the 14th, Producer Price Index, and then CPI on the 15th. So we'll see what those figures come out at. Up to now, the Fed have been unable to reduce interest rates. They initially said they were going to reduce them 5 times this year. Now they're down to 3 times this year. And a lot of commentators, powerful commentators, have said they don't believe the Fed is going to be able to lower interest rates at all this year. I believe they will get their 3 interest rate reductions in, because I think, well, we'll see starting next 15th of May, CPI figures, if they come out a little bit softer. And I think we will begin to see them softer. And we'll look at some of the things in a moment that will drive it to go softer. But these are the figures. We're beginning to see NFP data, non-farm payroll data, beginning to soften a little bit, and unemployment rate picking up a little bit. So we'll go on to the charts of the day. So first of all, the thing is about inflation is that it has an immediate knock-on effect, really, on the value of the dollar. I mean, all these things together, inflation, growth, employment, they all affect the US dollar. And the US dollar recently has fallen off quite sharply, and that has spawned the recent little rally that we've seen. In fact, when we saw this deep dive down in the US dollar, and we saw that not just with NFP figures, but there's some figures earlier showing inflation beginning to soften, and we saw a dive in the US dollar, and that spawned a nice rally in Bitcoin and other crypto. And we'll look at those in a moment. There've been some big rises there. But as we've said, and we could look at this long term again, but we won't, because I think we're limited on time, but basically whenever the US dollar takes a long-term turn from either down to up or up to down, it is a major turning point usually. In fact, historically, it's always been a major turning point for Bitcoin prices. And so if we have seen the top in the US dollar here, and the US dollar is on the beginning of a decline, and if this is a completed ABC higher, then we can decline much lower, that is going to be quite positive for Bitcoin and risk assets moving forward. So we said last week that there was a triangle in Bitcoin and Bitcoin was looking to pump higher. So we will look at that in a moment. But this is basically the only slight concern I'd have here is it does still look like a bit of a correction to the downside. We have an A down, a B up. So basically 3 waves down, 3 waves up, and then 5 waves down. That would itself be a correction. So we may still potentially have another push up higher to go. And that could be off the back of geopolitical issues. So we have an adage in investment circles saying sell in May and go away. And very often when May comes, a lot of the big institutions, the big traders, they often start to slow down, take a holiday. We've had the tax into a new tax year. Things go a little bit quiet from May onwards, and there's often a sell-off and the markets go very quiet. That may happen this year, but I think this year may be a little bit different, particularly with crypto, because crypto is still largely in the retail domain. It's still driven a lot by retail traders buying and selling. And yes, we have more institutional. We've had the institutional floodgates opening or beginning to open with the approval of the Bitcoin ETF, the regulated ETF. So the floodgates have begun to open a little bit, and we saw some flows. We saw some negative outflows recently in the ETF, which caused Bitcoin to fall. And now we're beginning to see some inflows once again. So there is still some institutional interest, but I think still a lot of the driver is going to be from retail here. Retail are really engaged with the crypto market. And as you know, as Bruce is saying, and so many others saying, it's potentially the monetary revolution. We're not just seeing the retailers, we are seeing even governments who are having problems with their fiat financial system, they're moving more over towards relying on blockchain and Bitcoin in particular. So there's a lot of real positive things happening within crypto. And I think the outlook is pretty positive. So that's just looking at dollar index there. We'll take a look at oil. Oil again has taken a deep dive down, and it's kind of an ABC correction down. And a little bit like dollar index, where it hadn't quite reached the target to the top, oil also hasn't quite reached the target to the downside. So you can see here the 100% projection is just a little bit lower. So we may still have a little bit lower to go with oil. This would mean that there's potentially a little bit more weakness in oil, but if we do see an escalation pick up again in the Middle East, or even with Russia, Ukraine, then this could be, just as it shows here, an ABC correction down, and we could see oil push up to the upside. So there are no certainties in trading. There are possibilities and there are probabilities, a probability for every possibility. And it sounds a bit crazy, but we have to basically build our trade structure, our risk and reward around those probabilities. So if price were to dip and touch this 100% and start to move up, with oil, the probability would probably then favor upside with a close stop loss just below to protect from potential downside. So then the potential loss will be small, the potential gain will be very large, and that's effectively how trading works. It's just playing the probabilities, like playing cards, especially if you're counting your cards. So if you do your research properly, you've got a good chance of winning within trading. So that's a look at oil. Gold, again, kind of tied with oil. They're kind of loosely correlated, but again, we've got an ABC correction down. May possibly have a bit lower to go, but actually, it looks like the ABC may have completed to the downside, because we are pushing up quite impulsively here. If I just expand it out a little bit, we're seeing some good movement up, but we could potentially still see a further push down before we push up further again. But I think the outlook for gold is probably still very positive. We've been rising for a long time in gold. We reached all-time high very, very recently, and we just had a correction down. This is all overlapping, kind of corrective movements. We could still correct a little bit further down, but I think the impulsive direction is definitely still to the upside. So I'm bullish gold for the time being. And as Bruce said, if you'd held gold over the years, you'd have done very well. Yes, it costs money to store your gold, etc., but it's still a store of value, and it's still a hedge against inflation. And we've recently had those inflation worries. So yeah, gold's a good one. I think it's a good, sensible investment as part of our diversified portfolio. So as Bruce said, it doesn't make sense not to include property, not to include Bitcoin, not to include gold, because Markovitz's theory, and basically he's a Nobel Prize winner, who spawned modern portfolio theory, was saying that, his theory is that people need to diversify into as many uncorrelated assets as possible, because you never know for certain which asset is going to pump and which asset is going to dump. But if you diversify over the long term, you should do very, very well. And you're not exposed completely to one asset, which could dump all in one go. So at least with diversification, you spread the risk, you reduce the risk, and you're still exposed to upside. So it makes all the sense in the world to hold these assets as part of your diversified portfolio. And then we'll look at, not DXY, we'll look at SPX. SPX, again, looking a little bit vulnerable, because we had that high, we've fallen quite sharply, and the move up so far is looking corrective. So a little bit vulnerable, and maybe we still have another leg to go down in SPX, the S&P 500. If that's the case, it's actually quite highly correlated with Bitcoin and with other cryptos. So we could just be seeing a short-term rise in these assets, but Bitcoin is actually looking really good. So I want to jump into Bitcoin because there's a lot of story to be seen there. And actually, we predicted this, and we were in the show before it even pushed back above this bottom line here. I said there's a potential triangle in the making. And as we said before, a triangle is what's called a pre-terminal wave. And then from a triangle, you get what's called the thrust from a pre-terminal wave. The thrust is the terminal wave. and the thrust will be expected to go above the previous all-time high as it is here, of Bitcoin around 73,800, somewhere around there. So you would expect that, but very often when you break above a trend line here or break above resistance, that resistance then turns into support. So then the price often comes down to retest what is now support before it then takes off more to the upside. So I think Bitcoin might actually lead the way with risk assets. And I actually think it's completely conceivable that we could see an all-time high on Bitcoin without seeing an all-time high on even the S&P, for example. We could see higher in the S&P before it turns down, but I think that Bitcoin is one of the most positive assets at the moment, and it's recovered very, very substantially from the recent sell-off we had from 73 down to 56,000. So quite a substantial sell-off, but it's already recovered more than half of that in just the last couple of days. And that recovery was almost solely down to these weak non-farm payrolls, basically saying the US economy is softening, which means that the Fed will be more likely to lower interest rates going forward. If they lower interest rates, there's more money to spend, there's less expenditure to cover obligations, debt interest, etc. And also it will help eventually bail the US out of its severe debt problem, because at the moment they have to pay and they have to roll over a lot of this debt, and they're paying a massive cost in interest on these loans. And so if interest rates lower and lower, if they're able to lower interest rates, which they cannot do whilst inflation's elevated, but if inflation is falling, at the moment it is falling, then if interest rates are able to be reduced, then the debt burden is less. The actual interest rate burden to repay those debts, the interest on the debt is reduced, and it helps the US a lot. So the US want to keep the economy strong, and they want inflation. That's kind of a soft landing. I think they're unlikely to achieve a soft landing. I think we are going to see either inflation will reduce, but the problem is growth will reduce also, and unemployment will rise, and that's the precursor to recession. And so we'll see then lower and lower interest rates, and actually probably money printing again in the future to bail themselves out. And as Bruce said, even if it's not money printing, they're actually devising new monetary policies, really sort of extreme, they dream up new monetary policies to get out of this situation, but it can't be done forever. And so there is potentially a price to pay and potentially an issue. So we're seeing Bitcoin actually here just pushing down quite sharply from that little push up. So we may have had a first wave higher there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then pushing down. I said we may well retest this line here, this diagonal line here, which was overhead resistance. Now it's underlying support. So we may well retest that before we push up again. So if that's a wave 1, we test down maybe in a wave 2. And if that's the case, we could expect a strong wave 3 to the upside. Wave 3 is nearly always the extended powerful wave in Elliott wave terms. So I'm hoping that we do see that slight push down and a real rebound, strong rebound to the upside. That's what I'm really hoping for with Bitcoin. And we've seen the same sort of movement amongst the other assets, but they're moving pretty much in tandem with Bitcoin. So even Litecoin here, we've seen, again, it looks a bit corrected to the upside. I think that we may see a bit further push down before we get another push up, like Bitcoin. So I think they're going to be all held pretty much in lockstep with Bitcoin, but I think Bitcoin will lead the way there. So again, I'm expecting probably, if Bitcoin pushes down to retest that support line, I think Litecoin and the rest will follow suit. And when Bitcoin retests the support and bounces higher, I also suspect these others will do exactly the same thing. And we've seen, quite a nice little bounce. Same sort of chart pattern as you can see. Very, very similar chart pattern here with XRP. And again, like Bitcoin, just pushing down a little bit. So they're kind of really held very tightly in lockstep together. Solana also, we see it sort of a really good push higher in Solana. This is an area we'd like to break through on Solana to start to see more upside. But again, like Bitcoin, again, we pushed strongly higher. I mean, we pushed all the way up to 157, and the low just a few days ago was down at 118 and we pushed to 157. So massive push up there. I mean, 25% plus, I'm guessing.
Big moves, almost leading the way, but I'm sure you're going to get to it. The doggy coin leading the way. I think almost 20% over the last few days.
Well, doggy has been amazing, as you say. I mean, similar actually in percentage terms. We got down to
Similar,
about 12.
very, very similar.
So we're actually 30% up even now, even though doggy has fallen to 16 because it peaked. It peaked, 16, 17. So right now it's 16. It went down to 12, didn't it? I think.
Yeah.
30%, 33% higher, even now, over 33% higher than it was just a few days ago. So doggy is one of those highly volatile ones. And we've always said that these memes are like the crypto on steroids. So you don't even need to leverage them. I mean, just imagine, just in a couple of days, you've seen 33% rise on doggy. So if you can pick the bottoms nicely and catch these rises, potentially there's a lot of money to be made without risking leverage at all.
Yep.
So if you're bought into Doge, without leverage, you can effectively just hold it. And if it goes lower, you just have to hold it and hold on to your losses until it comes back to positive territory. But the movement down at the moment appears to be corrected down. So I still think that we've probably got a lot higher to go on doggy here. And potentially, we can get back above that recent high of 22, 23 cents. So there's real potential for some massive potential gains there. But just short term, we are seeing a bit of downside on these assets. So again, Bitcoin, even as we speak, we're seeing Bitcoin pushing to the downside. And let's see. Let's hope, as I say, it just retests that support there. The big gainer is not showing it right now, but one of the big gainers was Bonk, has done really, really well. Sorry, Book of Memes was the real big gainer. So Book of Memes is still up for the day, 13.5%. That's just on the day. So absolutely amazing. But the issue we have here is that potentially, again, we're seeing an ABC to the upside. So we may see some downside on a lot of these tokens before we see the next upside push. So we're seeing, potentially we've got an ABC here. We may still push a little bit higher to complete the C wave, but it looks like it's corrected to the upside. So I do think we could see some more downside on these tokens. So if you're in Bitcoin, and you could well have been in Bitcoin, because right down from here, even if you caught it when we broke back into the triangle at the $59 level, you're still quite substantially higher than we were back then. So if you jumped in on it, you could basically now, I would suggest, protect your position just below this diagonal trend line, protect your long position, and then if the market were to crash much lower, you've still got a guaranteed profit no matter what. But if it pushes up, we can target new all-time highs. So again, that for me is the way to trade. So all of the tokens in general, most of them, one that we were promoting as being really positive, BNB, having a really positive outlook, is actually one that's suffering a little bit today, but it's still very much in consolidation. And even if we push lower, it really does look as though we've got a new higher high to come than we had here. So above 644 on BNB. So I wouldn't be overly concerned, because this is so much of a corrective pattern, sideways consolidation, part of what's called a continuation pattern. And Bitcoin, actually, I just want to show Bitcoin again, because we had a particularly important, let's just see, I'll probably look at it on the daily just to show what I mean here. So just have to expand it out so you can actually see what's meant here. So on the daily, we've had basically from the high here that we had on this B wave high here, is this spike here. We've actually, it's okay. So I know people were saying that potentially we had what's called divergence, and I was just checking, there is actually no divergence in place here at all. So when we talk about divergence, we're talking about something like RSI, which is an oscillator, and you look for peaks in RSI and peaks in the price. And if they're in the same sort of direction, so we've got a downward slope on the peak in price, but we also have a slight downward slope on the peaks in RSI. So that means there's no divergence here. So there's no divergence signal at this stage to tell us that Bitcoin price is going either up or down. And even if we look longer term, the slope is downward on RSI and it's also downward on price. So again, no divergence signal. But at the moment, if this candle finishes, and this is a daily candle, so it's important to watch what happens with the prices today. Maybe this is just an early sell-off. It's early hours in America right now. So maybe America will cause a rebound, who knows? But maybe it's caused by this threat of escalation again in the Middle East. So we've got Israel are actually warning people to evacuate Rafah right now, aren't they? And saying there's going to be some action there in Rafah. So if that's the case, again, it could be negative. Maybe that's what's causing this price to push down at the moment. I don't know. And again, Russia are making, they're giving all sorts of warning signs out. They've even threatened the UK, saying there's going to be nuclear retaliation if UK were to continue to provide arms, I think, for Ukraine. I mean, certainly they've said there'll be nuclear retaliation if the West puts feet or boots on the ground, as they call it, in Ukraine to effectively fight with Ukraine. Then they say there would be nuclear retaliation. And I don't doubt it, because if you back a wild animal into a corner, back a bear into a corner, whatever, they're going to come out fighting. And we are continuing to see Bitcoin still pushing down. This candle is actually becoming a little bit negative now. We've started to see, that big wick to the upside, which is basically means price tested higher. It's actually failed to move now higher. And what we did, we got very, very close to we can see the moving averages here. So we've got basically the 50, the 100, and the 200. So we broke above the 100 moving average, which was quite a positive sign. We stayed well above the 200 moving average. We broke above the 100, and we tested the 50, and now we're actually moving down. So this will continue. The 100 moving average will continue to move sort of sideways. So if it does retest, maybe that 100 moving average will act as support. This is actually quite technically important, that especially if it coincides with this trend line here that we have touching the two highs here. So that may well act as support. So that's really what I'm looking at next. And that could be a good risk reward barrier for potentially, again, possibly jumping in long with a stop loss somewhere just below. Potentially there's still plenty of upside to come. So
I'm going to need to start.
Sorry, Bruce?
I'm going to need to start the interview here so we can get it all in.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
I think we've done enough. I've gone on long enough, Bruce.
Well, it's so odd. It's always great. So, but I have this thing queued up right here for 43 minutes right now. So I'm going to go ahead and start that, share my screen. This is Kyle Hopman. He's a U.S. presidential appointee. And I got to sit down with him during the GBA event. Let's go ahead and play this.
And we are back here at the Government Blockchain Association event, The Future of Money, Governance, and the Law. Hats off to these guys. Another great event. Nice venue, too. Wonderful people. I have with me here Kyle Hopman, and he is the vice chairman of the National Credit Union Administration, which is an appointed position. I know how those can be on the local here, so it's a lot of fun, I'm sure, and you're doing a lot of important stuff. So if you don't mind, tell us a little bit about what you're doing and what brought you here to this event.
Yeah, I'm interested in this space in general, digital assets, and as part of my job, I see it as I don't want to see credit unions slowly go the way of Blockbuster Video because their regulator wouldn't let them compete. And if you know what FDIC is for banks, provides insurance, $250,000 an account. We do the same thing at NCUA. It's just a separate entity, a separate insurance fund for America's 4,700 credit unions.
Well, it is pretty interesting. It's something that what did we have? We had 3 banks fail last year, right? Yep. 3 or 5, or whatever it was. And that really took a hit, I feel like, out of FDIC.
It took about 10% of their fund.
Right.
Yeah. They have ballpark $200 billion. And this was 20-something billion gone from it. I'm certainly not here to knock the FDIC and say I would have done it any better.
Yeah.
That happened partly because Silicon Valley Bank had giant business accounts.
Okay.
Like credit unions generally don't. Who has $500 million in checking?
Well, yeah, that's what we were talking about off screen, right?
Yeah. So, like Roku, the streaming app,
Yeah.
you know, it had 487 million. It's the one I remember. So, in one account, and you're insured for $250,000. So, 486.75 million was not insured.
Wow.
And they had a lot of situations like that, kind of unique. But yeah, that was a trying time.
That was a trying time. Now you're here in Washington, obviously working on the Hill, talking with these people that are here. Now, a lot of this stuff can be backed legislatively. And even there was something that sunsetted over the last few months, if I understand correctly, some type of legislation. Is that correct? Can you talk a little bit
legislation
about that?
sunsets all the time. But what are you referring to?
Some part that bails out the banks if they get into this, so they don't have to dip into the FDIC fund or your fund.
So when it comes to share insurance, most financial regulation in America was developed from disasters, right or wrong.
Okay.
The Great Depression created deposit insurance. It's why banks have to be open the Friday after Thanksgiving, because you can never be closed more than 3 days in a row. That's an American thing.
Okay.
Because the bank back then would close and you just never see them again. That's why
We're not ready to open up yet.
that's why the stock market's open the Friday after Thanksgiving. Anyway, and then 9/11 created some stuff on BSA AML, and then the financial crisis created a lot of things. But there was talk about raising that limit 250,000. For business accounts. The whole thing with Silicon Valley Bank, the reason regular people cared is not to bail out VC funds and their investments.
Right.
It's this whole thing was Thursday and Friday. If you remember that, they're going to run payroll, right? So, and there was talk, should we raise it to $1 million, for business accounts, or pick another number, 10 million for accounts you run payroll through, for government insurance. And I understand that merit, and we'll do whatever Congress says, obviously. But I think at the end of the day, the solution is there is a private deposit insurance market. Banks and credit unions have lots of insurance policies, property casualty, etc.
Okay.
So I think that's the long run solution. I would think most Americans would want someone else writing checks before the government has to get in on a bailout, right? You want
music to my ears for sure. Yeah.
And it does exist. Private share insurance. It's just no one's going to buy it unless it's clear that they're on the hook for it, right? So.
Interesting stuff. So it sounds like it's fast moving business, right? There's a lot to it. You would think that it's not changing that much, but it sounds like there's a lot going on.
Yeah, I mean, going back to last year, that was the biggest event. So interest rate risk is like a big thing we're looking at now, because we often fight the last war, and the biggest event in my world last year was the Silicon Valley Bank failure. And what kills me is that was basic balance sheet management that brought them down. All the cool stuff they did for that industry was not what brought them down.
Okay.
And now that bank is gone forever. It's part of a bigger bank, but it is unique about the United States. We have all these niche banks. Canada's basically 6 for the whole country. Everybody has one of those.
Right.
Imagine if all we had was Citi, Wells, JPM.
Right.
We've got ones that we have credit unions that know the Haitian community. Who else answers the phone in Haitian Creole?
Right.
I'm from Maine originally. We got ones that know the lobster industry, banks. And like they know the names of the types of boats, and they know that the weather is going to affect the cash flows. Like, that's a unique thing about America, and I think most people want to keep that. Very niche, that know their community or the industry or the group they serve. It's unique to America, and I think we want to keep it.
Well, that is really cool. So talk a little bit more about the administration.
Yes. So we're a 3-member board, all appointed by the president and confirmed by the U.S. Senate. We don't serve in the presidential administration. It's an independent agency, just like the Federal Reserve is. Just like FDIC and SEC. So they're fixed terms. Mine ends next year. And it's a hell of a process to go through, just the whole presidential nomination process, especially when you have to go before the Senate and they answer questions from them as part of your job interview. You have to do that.
That's a heck of an interview,
yes,
right?
It's nerve-wracking. You practice it ahead of time. People play the senators, and throw questions at you. You practice. They call they call it murder boarding.
Okay.
But I'm here because I have no illusions that technology is not going to cause problems.
Yeah.
That digital assets are not going to cause problems.
Yeah.
That AI is not going to cause problems. It definitely will.
Yep.
I know it will. Do you know that there were 0 car crashes before we had cars? But guess what? Out in the street behind us, nobody's on a horse.
Yeah.
I'm not going back.
Yeah.
So mine is putting on my America hat, not so much my NCUA hat, but that we can dominate these new industries. America can, just like we did the internet.
Right.
Everybody got the downsides. You're going to get the downsides no matter what. Everywhere in the world has computer viruses.
Right.
Only some countries have good paying jobs in antivirus software.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And we have a cybersecurity industry. It pays well. Do you know any unemployed people who are good at cybersecurity? No, I don't either. Right. But everybody has cyber attacks. You're going to get the negatives and the AI deep fakes. Right. But we're very good at grabbing the upside in this country if the government will let Americans do what they do best, which is monetize new technologies to create jobs. Because you're going to get the downside one way or the other. And I think it's just who gets paid for the upside. That's kind of my guiding thing.
Well, I think that sounds great. It's so important, and that's one of the things I feel like a lot of. I can tell you, I'm around the world all the time. People are scared to do business here. They're scared to come here with any type of blockchain.
Doesn't it pain you?
Of course.
This is law-abiding people, legit businesses offering services people want. I mean, that's what we do. Is we find solutions, right?
Yeah.
Everybody in the world lost their, video rental jobs, right?
Yeah.
We lost them, and our friends in Canada and Mexico too.
Right.
But we, on the other hand, have the, headquarters for Hulu and Netflix and the jobs and the local investors that got in big, the employees that got in early, life-changing, right?
Yes.
Pension funds that were in there. You're going to get the negative and the positive, and it kills me to see. I'd rather not invest in America. I'd rather not found my company in America.
Right.
I'm less likely to find a job in America. It's just not how we were raised.
Yeah.
Nobody in Miami gets in a raft to get to Cuba.
Right. Right.
We were always a place people want to go to. Right. And it's just a shame to see smart people and things happen elsewhere,
Well, that is really interesting. Very good points as well. I mean, obviously, this is you're used to saying this stuff, but it's important. It's important that you're here and you are saying it. So you mentioned that there are two maybe initiatives or something that you did.
We put out a couple pieces of positive guidance, and that's signaling, right? One of them, and I'll be bipartisan here. I'm a Republican nominee, but was just sort of broad principles around blockchain, modeled after what I think is one of the best things that's happened since I've been alive in economic policy. 1997, Clinton-Gore administration. Bill Clinton was in the White House, Democrat, and they put out 5 principles for this new thing called the internet. It's bizarre to read it right now, but number 1, the private sector shall lead. And that was a signal. They posted on whitehouse.gov, which had only existed for 2 years at that point. And it was a signal from upon high that we're going to see how this thing plays out. And, maybe update some laws because bad guys will always use the new thing for a scam. But, fraud's already illegal. Internet's a new way to do it. Anyway, we put out broad principles. And there is more experimentation on the credit union side and the bank side. And I've made it a priority and had, internally in our 3-member board, the deal making,
Right.
I'm very proud of it. The other financial regulators, right or wrong, obviously I think it's the wrong path, but the other financial regulators have been anywhere from hostile to neutral on digital assets in general. And I think they might have gotten a little confused by the bad stuff with crypto, with a capital, a C, rather than the use of it. Right. Stable coins to pay for things and blockchain-based identification.
Yes.
Isn't it a shame? I wish I wasn't,
No, it's crazy. And I saw it.
I'm better off I was outside America. No, only bad guys should say that.
Listen, I did a lot of work over the years outside of America for just those reasons. There's not that there wasn't a lot of guidance. So speaking, and I know they're ringing the bell. I know he's going to be on stage here in a minute. We had Michael Saylor just came out with his new identity. You mentioned identity. I don't know if you saw it this week. He's had an identity product that he's launching on Bitcoin.
It's neat. I mean, not only I don't know that product, but credit unions are using it, to know the basics of KYC, know your customer,
right?
Who is paying who, etc. And onboarding of a new member, that's what credit unions call customers, members, is much faster.
Yep.
Fraud reduction, which as an insurer we care about a lot. 4 of the 7 credit unions we had to take over last year because of fraud.
Yep.
Fraud reduction and useful, and also I think our whole ID system, even in this country, is a little odd. The guy at the liquor store doesn't need to know your address.
Right?
Are you of legal drinking age or not?
Right.
Right.
This is like identity A1A. This is what we've been talking about.
You should give the information you need. Are you of drinking age or whatever?
I pass. That's all you need to know.
And in return, I'm giving my license to operate an automobile in the District of Columbia.
Right.
That's what gets me on an airplane.
Right.
So if that expired, I'm still Kyle Houtman.
Right.
I can't drive a car.
Right.
But I can't go on a plane. It's a little clunky, isn't it?
It is.
So very neat stuff. And I'm hoping that the U.S. government finally understands that whatever they think about crypto, it's a separate topic. But there was a difference between buying an internet stock, and then your company having email and having a website and using things. Right. There's a difference. And so you know, the future is bright, and my only concern, I'm trying to do my little part, is to make sure America does what it does best and captures the most upside from disruptive things.
Well, it's a big part, Kyle. I
You bet.
appreciate you coming on.
Absolutely. Glad to be here.
We'll see you soon.
There he is, the great Kyle Hauptman. Really great guy. It was a pleasure doing it. Hats off to our friends at the Government Blockchain Association, the GBA, for throwing such a wonderful event with such a high caliber of people. High caliber of people, wonderful people. Hats off Gerard Daché, Kathy Daché, and the entire GBA team. Guys, signing off. See you in a few hours.
Your voice is powerful. When combined with social engagement, it's a force for change. Decentralized media paired with free speech is the catalyst for an empowered world and a unified, invaluable ecosystem. Join Global Boost, become a champion of free speech, and help to reshape the future of media.